Krish Raval is a law graduate, the son of Indian immigrants who came to Britain from Ethiopia in 1975. In 1996, he set up Learn to Lead, through which community and business leaders would pass on their skills to students who would then apply them in the local community. The aim was community transformation through the development of leadership in young people. Krish believes the idealism of the young holds the answer to many of the world's problems. He has a particular focus on using his work to enable conflict resolution. During the course of his career, he has worked with Virgin Media, the UK's National Health Service, the United Nations, and a number of British schools and colleges. He is a member of Initiatives of Change. Welcome back to the English Hour on ANN Satellite Television. It's really good to have you with us. Thank you for being with us. Our guest today is Krish Raval. Krish, thank you so much for joining us for this moment. It really is great to have you.
Yes, lovely to be here. Lovely to meet you. And I am slightly nervous about the questions you're going to ask, but I will do my best.
Well, we're going to talk about leadership. We're
Yes.
going to talk about Hinduism. And what was our third subject?
Interfaith in the UK.
Interfaith relationships in the UK, which is poignant, actually, and very important to us now here in Britain and well, to the world. So let's start. What makes a leader? Can you train people to become leaders, or is leadership a skill you have since birth? Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, Winston Churchill give us different views on how the great and the good become the leaders that affect entire generations internationally. To some, making a decision is more important than making the right decision. Leadership entails a relationship between the leader and the led, which involves the use of power. How do leaders influence their followers? Do leaders focus on keeping power, or should their main priority be to serve others? In a democracy, if leaders fail us, do we abandon them? Is democracy better than dictatorship? And does history make men, or do men and women make history? So, well, leadership. I mean, what makes a leader? I know you work in this field because you do a lot of work at Initiatives of Change on the whole business of trying to promote leadership and quality leadership. People, my father used to say to me that the best thing about leaders is they need to make up their minds, because the big failure in people generally is the capacity to decide anything. And he used to say that in business it was more important to make a decision than to get the decision right, because if you could always correct a wrong decision, but what you couldn't afford is to have a whole number of people sitting waiting for you, if you were in charge, to make up your mind, because they'd all be frustrated. You need to get on with life. But I don't know, what's your take on leadership?
Well, you said a number of interesting things there. You started off by talking about a leader, and then you actually referred to your dad. And for very many of us, the first leaders we have are our parents.
Yes.
And our first understanding about leadership comes from our parental role models, or people of that age when we are kids. And of course, children themselves also lead their parents and their families. So leadership is not just for business. I'd like to encourage everyone to think of leadership as distributed. It's everywhere, and it's a current of the human experience. And if you look at it that way, then there's a difference between a leader and leadership. Leadership involves a relationship between the leader and the led. Between one person and a group of people. And sometimes, as you kind of hint at, if you get the decision wrong, that creates some kind of change. If you get the decisions right, that also creates change. And if you do nothing, that also creates some kind of change. Stagnation also creates change. So it's really important, I think, for leaders to understand that they can, where the limits of their influence begins and ends, and everyone, to some extent, is a leader.
Yes.
That's my kind of take on it. So if you start with that, then you can then talk to legitimately anyone about leadership, and leadership is not just for an exclusive group.
But there is a number of issues that come up.
Yes.
One of which is power. You start
Yes.
off by saying, I mean, and you half implied, you didn't say, but you half implied that seeking power was in some way wrong. But presumably, if you're in a leadership position, you seek influence because you want to change things. Because
Yes.
you may want to change the world. You may feel a burning desire. I mean, you're Hindu, and we'll talk about Hinduism later, but I mean Mahatma Gandhi, for example, wanted to change the world. And so you seek influence, and people don't like the word power, but you are seeking to make things better. That requires some personal empowerment. You have to, otherwise you're just going to sit by the edge of the road and watch the world pass by. You can't be passive as a leader.
Yeah.
So
Power is very interesting, because if I had the power, it depends how you influence people and how you execute your power. If my power comes with a gun and put a gun against your head and say, like, do this, that's one kind of power, and you're most likely going to do it, but
Yes.
it's not going to be sustainable.
right.
That's usually tyranny or dictatorship or some form of coercion. That's not real leadership, I think. Leadership, you're right, and you use Gandhi as an example, but you have Churchill, you have other people. It's when you say something, when you actually mobilize a person or an individual to take some kind of action because they want to. Now, it could be through a series of transactions. It could be that, you know, if you vote for me, I will do this for you. That's one kind of exercise of power. That's one kind of way of doing things. It's a bartering system. But that's transactional leadership or transactional power. There's another kind of power that's transformational, which Gandhi and Mandela and Churchill exhibit, which is you and I need to do this because of the situation we are in, and because we will do this, this entire situation will change, and we will change along with it. So you go to higher and higher levels of consciousness, I suppose. And sometimes in that process, I will get you to do what you don't want to do, but because it's the right thing to do. So I remember having a breakfast with Nelson Mandela some years ago, and that was just phenomenal. And it was just me. I wish it was. It was a number of people there. And he actually got very angry because, you know, he was criticizing the people who were in that room for not including other people from other parties and for not making the event a bigger one. But I was so impressed that he wasn't just people-pleasing the group. They loved him, and he was able to be angry with them and saying, and in his anger, people actually realized that they had done something wrong. So he could be himself. And they realized that, they need to do something better differently. So he took them along by being entirely himself. That's very different when somebody's angry because of some emotional defect that they have, or because they haven't got enough power, or some tiny thing that they want hasn't materialized. There's a difference between being angry because your own needs are not met, and being angry or being, exercising power on behalf of a larger group.
Interesting. So that's something else you touched on. I mean, the business of whether a leader has to be right. I mean, leader has to have a certain level of integrity of some kind.
Yeah.
But in the Middle East, we get tribalism. We get it all over the world, and in a sense, we get it in every country, even in Britain, because it's the family writ large. And in that concept of leadership, loyalty comes into play. And in terms of loyalty, people, so the leader has a commitment to their followers, or the tribe, or the group, or the family, to be responsible for them. In return, their commitment to him, it is a kind of a bargain, is to follow him, or he or she indeed, right or wrong. That loyalty doesn't demand that the leader be right. It's a loyalty that is based on this kind of unwritten contract, whereby, and you see this in the Middle East, people will follow the tribal leader, right or wrong, because they have a kind of a loyalty to them. In a way, it's not a bad thing. It's an approach to life that is, in some ways, very comforting and very easy, isn't it? But we in the West tend now to have moved away from that. We do expect our leaders to be right, and if they fail us,
Yes.
we abandon them. I mean, that's part of democracy too, as well, isn't it, in the West? I mean,
Well, I think, let's start from the beginning. So the familial leadership models that are there in the Middle East are actually quite impressive. So what happens is that even in a large family, I don't know many Middle Eastern countries, but I am familiar with Oman, and I'm familiar with Lebanon, I'm familiar with Tunisia, and now I think of it, there are a number of countries I've been to and I have great friends there. Actually, leadership is there right from the beginning. It's back to where you started, in the family. So the families are great models for leadership, and often when you have large families, the elder brother will be the leader for his or her other siblings, or the elder sister. So the eldest member of the eldest child will have a duty to teach and enculturate his or her siblings. And when you have large families, this is so from a very early age, people are introduced to concepts of mentorship, role modeling, and boundaries. And research has shown that young people learn best from other young people, 7 years older or younger from them. So that's a really great thing. I'm not sure that follow my leader come what may is necessarily the right answer, but do we not in our country here in the UK have people who will support the Conservative Party come what may, or the Labour Party come what may, tribal loyalty to their class, their group? So it's a human phenomenon. I think that what is disturbing for traditional cultures is when you have the disruption of these very deep-seated structures of leadership, of authority. So, if you're in a room where you're sitting down and somebody asks you, what do you do? And everyone looks at the older person, the eldest in the room. And once that person says, this is what we'll do, everyone else will follow. If there is that model, that increasingly is being challenged in the globalized world that we're living in. On the other hand, very few people, that person who says yes or no is often cognizant of the interests of the people in the group, and will know that if he or she disappoints people in the group regularly, there's going to be a problem. So sometimes they do make the right decision and there is trust. The problem occurs when the leader of one group is in conflict with another, a member of another group. But then there are also traditional means at its best, in these cultures when they're at their best, to resolve these disputes, and they're far more sophisticated than often the sort of rigid court structures that we have. There are negotiated settlements, there are arbitrations, there's understanding of people's honor, there's sympathy. So yes, traditional structures are going to be threatened, But I hope we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, to use the allusion that we refer to in the English language.
In terms of politics
Yes.
and the leadership of nations,
Yeah.
is there a better model? I mean, is democracy per se better than dictatorship, or is...
Yes, I would say so.
You would?
Yes.
Although, in terms of the results, I mean, we look at the... Democracies are pretty good at going to war, and they're pretty
Yes,
good
they
at
are.
making mistakes. I mean, are we... But you would aspire, you'd think a world based on democracy is a kind of world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a political theorist. I'm a student of leadership, but I'm not a political theorist. But I would suggest that different countries have their own interpretations of what democracy is, and it's when you put your model of democracy and impose it on the other, then it's not about democracy or anything else, it's the imposition that's the problem. I also think that, there are historical stages, so maybe some countries need to go through some kind of, like a harder form of democracy, I suppose, a tougher form of democracy than others, because there are different value systems and as I say, different historical precedents. But I think it's very dangerous to get away from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the freedoms and the universal values that are there.
No, interesting. So then this all begs the question. I mean, because of your profession, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it begs the question: can you, because you are, I guess, a peace builder, and you're looking at leadership as one of the aspects of this. Is it something you can train people to be leaders? Do you believe that?
I absolutely believe that. I absolutely think that leaders are not just the people who are born with certain gifts. Because you look at anyone, you look at Churchill here in since we're in the UK, let us look at Winston Churchill. I mean, he was a very bad student, very poor, he failed,
yes.
He cheated, he had hardly any leadership skills. I'm just talking about the people we've mentioned already. Gandhi was not meant to be, a leader. If you looked at him at the age of 10, this kid who could barely say hello to anyone or talk to in front of a whole group. Yet these two people who hated it, well, Gandhi didn't hate anyone, but Churchill certainly hated him, just led millions and are in our consciousness and our memories, and sort of determine some of our actions here, certainly in the West and in South Asia. So something must have happened. There must have been some form of nurturing, societal nurturing, that led them to get the gifts that they got. And that means that you can never write off anyone. And also people who've suffered, who've not had have not been given the gifts of, I don't know, what are the traits of leadership, but say communication or great intelligence or whatever, right from the beginning. They can connect with other people who are like them, which is the vast majority of us have brokenness. People who have brokenness, that means they have problems, can relate to other people who have problems. Where if you led a perfect life, often that's not there. So I absolutely think it's a great question, and it's an eternal question, is that whether you can actually learn to lead. I think you can, but it means that you have to be surrounded by people who can teach you either directly or just through their example. You've got to want to learn, and of course experiences teach you. And I think in our society at this time, you cannot insulate yourself from other people, and therefore you're forced to lead. And it comes back to where we started, that in your decision making in an interconnected consumerist society, you are leading. So So if I choose this product as opposed to that product, if I choose to ignore this person but befriend another person, if I choose to help this person or not another, if I choose to vote for a particular group and not another group, these are all leadership decisions. So even somebody who's not in a formal position of leadership can lead to some extent. So everyone is in some way or another a leader.
So we have, when it comes down to it, on the big sort of, I don't know, the big questions at the age, I mean, does history make men, or do men and women, of course, make history? You're saying that essentially that men and women do make history. They do shape the world we live in. It is a question of...
Yeah, and also history is made of men and women, and this is so the currents that I feel that I am unable to direct, if there are such, have been still shaped by my predecessors, and my ability. I may not be able to stop neoliberalism or the force of environmental degradation, but at least I can contribute. And increasingly, of course, the internet and the web and social media is empowering me in a way that I could never be empowered before. So we're living in that unique way. So we're more able to redirect the currents of history. But even if I can't, I can at least begin to do something for a future generation.
Wow, well, that's interesting. Let's hold that thought and move on to our next topic for discussion, which I think has to be Gandhi and India and Hinduism. Well, in India, Hinduism and Gandhi. I mean, I would like to understand a little of that. What does Hinduism really mean? Who God is and how to love him are key issues for Hindus, as they are for people of all faiths. Hindus say they do not believe in many gods, rather that there is only one God, but there are differing interpretations of God, different aspects of God, different forms of God, and different visual representations of God, which sometimes in the Hindu concept of God are associated with demigods, which they describe as being like angels for Christians, Jews, and Muslims. Hinduism has no single ecclesiastical order, no primary prophet, nor any single holy book, and thus it is open to a broad diversity of views. Gandhi is probably our most celebrated Hindu, and he has been inspirational for many. He was and is especially noted for the concept of ahimsa, that is non-violence, a concept that he believed should apply to all living beings, and he regarded as one of the most important tenets of Hinduism. Well, now, Hinduism and Gandhi, where do we begin? Maybe with Hinduism, which is, now what is, are my misconceptions? I mean, Hinduism, I think of Hinduism as kind of a searching for perfection in a way, but with a multitude of gods. This is how I see it. I mean, this is completely wrong, probably, and the concept of reincarnation. These are the things that stand out for me in terms of Hinduism. But you're a Hindu. What does Hinduism mean to you?
Well, Hinduism, firstly, I'm very aware it's certainly the world's oldest living religion. So many thousands of years old, 5,000 years old at least in recorded history. And if you're a practitioner, you don't use the word Hinduism. You use two terms. One is Sanatan, and the other is Dharma. Sanatan means eternal. And Dharma, there isn't an English word, there isn't an English word that's the exact, for Dharma, but it means something like duty, essence, the core, the defining quality. So it's now an amalgam of these terms. So for instance, the Dharma of the sun is to produce light. The dharma of fire is to produce heat. The dharma of teacher is to serve the student. These are the inescapable qualities. Similarly, the dharma of the whole of creation is to love God. And so many thousands of years ago, these Hindus in these scriptures talked about loving God as the duty of every human being, the dharma of every human being. Now, who God is, how to love that God, is in conflict, and indeed even the different traditions within Hinduism have different ideas of this, because the idea of religion in a Western sense as a code of beliefs and behaviors, people didn't really, the ancient Hindus, as far as I understand, didn't really advocate that. What they had advocated is a way of being, a way of thinking, a way of living, which was loving and loving God, and it was distinct to each human being or each group of human beings. So nobody would say that God is this or God is that. Actually, if you think God is this and you really believe, because who's going to show you, then fine. That is accepted. So there aren't not many gods. There is only one God, but there are different interpretations of him or her.
So Hindus will believe in one God, you'd say?
Yes. And they have demigods that are equivalent to angels in the Catholic sense. Mm-hmm. But there is only one God. Every Hindu will believe this, but they may say it differently in a way that to somebody from a sort of English or a Judeo-Christian or Western background won't particularly get. So when they say there are many gods, they don't mean there are many gods. They mean that there are different aspects to God. That's what they will say. And the different forms that they have, either some will say that these are demigods or angels, or they'll say is again they are the visual representations of this unknowable being who is God.
And this concept...
So absolutely. And you talked about Gandhi. Gandhi would consistently advocate that view, that there's only one God. And as indeed every, even in the Bhagavad Gita, which is our main text, many would regard as our main text, they would say exactly that's what it said. There's only one God, but many, many manifestations.
Well, Gandhi, let's talk about Gandhi, because arguably one of the greatest men ever to have lived in modern times, anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, he, we call him Mahatma. I believe he didn't like the title Mahatma, which means a sort of holy one or so on.
Great soul, yeah.
Yeah. But Gandhi was inspirational, and I guess at many levels, but one of, or perhaps the key issue in terms of his international picture, the key thing that he drove forward was this concept of ahimsa, which is non-violence, which is not pacifism, because it's not the concept of sitting back, I'm not going to get involved. It was quite a proactive concept, wasn't it? Can you maybe explain a little of that?
Sure, I'd love to. If I can just start by saying that, of course, in the West, Gandhi is really known well, and outside of India, he's known very well, and we're like anyone of any Indian descent in him or any Indian connection is rightly really, really proud that there was such a figure called Gandhi, because, I mean, just people may not know, but at a time when a whole nation of people who were brown and followed different religions that weren't regarded by people who were white and ruling that land as legitimate. At a time when there was no dignity, he really did manage to bring dignity to people who actually thought they were, or were indentured and were persuaded, or could have been persuaded, that they weren't. There was nothing of real value in their own faith. There was only the West and England and the Empire that was great, and he actually gave great dignity to a whole country, and indeed, as I would think, led that country to freedom. So, but he's not the only great Hindu. There are many great Hindus. There's Swami Vivekananda. There is Ramakrishna Paramhans. There's Pandit Ram Sharma Acharya. There is Subhash Chandra Bose. So many people who people won't have heard of, who actually make up my thinking. So when you talk about Gandhi, we have to think of him and consider him alongside many other great freedom fighters, but also great Hindus who were around in the modern age. I'm not talking thousands of years ago. Indeed, he was influenced by them too. So ahimsa is non-violence, as he would call it, and he came to that really through his understanding of the Sermon on the Mount, which is a Christian, expression. And he highlighted those aspects of Hinduism that talked about, restraint, detachment, love. But there is also a place in Hinduism for the rest, which is righteous battle, standing up for yourself, not being a carpet. And I think that what his formulas were very good for the time, and still every peace, march, every civil protest, every change maker should know of them. But I don't think it's complete. I think that he would think it's complete. I think that there is more to it. So, for instance, if we were overrun, if we were at risk of being overrun by Nazis, it is right to fight, I think. And of course Hinduism allows for that.
But Gandhi would not. He would do it for passive resistance.
I think he was confused. I mean, not confused, but he was kind of fuzzy on it myself. I mean, I think he didn't say yes or he didn't say no, but whatever he said, do what the right thing is, and talk about courage. And you need courage. So his pacifism wasn't non-courageous. Like he would be willing to die, and he was hurt. But as Mandela would say, there are limits to passive resistance. At some point, you'll have to take up arms, and I would agree.
Mandela would say that. Gandhi wouldn't actually say that.
No, he wouldn't. No. But there are other Hindus who would, though, as well. So
yeah, I mean, so you're not a follower, therefore, of Gandhi's doctrine of ahimsa yourself, personally.
I think I am. I'm a vegetarian. I wouldn't, So what I think Gandhi gave a great model of is that if you are going to be violent, be sure that you have exhausted every non-violent means totally, completely.
The most violent men in the world would say they've exhausted non-violent men.
But they haven't. They don't.
No, they haven't. But
I don't. Well, by a reasonable standard. So I'm not. I'm not advocating violence in any way. I'm just saying that I get, as most people do, I follow Gandhi's non-violence to a very large extent, but I allow for violence. Yeah.
You might take a non-violent route, the Gandhi-esque approach, to sort of lie down on the settler road, risk your life or whatever, but make your protest without violence. It has to be the higher path if you can do it, doesn't it? I mean, surely.
Yes.
Because just in practical terms, we see so much.
That's right, and it's also the not just the higher, it's the safer route. So that's what it's not a fair thing for you to say that I'm not a Gandhian because I allow for violence. Every human being would, I'm just admitting that Gandhi was a great example of one aspect of one aspect of a way of contending with conflict that is the most important. He demonstrated his whole life, but people get confused and think, okay, all of Hinduism is this, and I was trying to say to you that Hinduism is more than that. Now, I don't know too much. You will know more about the Middle East than I do, but I do think that wherever we are, the norm should be non-violent, and then violence should be the absolute last resort. How to get to that, I'm not sure. In my own life, one way of getting here with people from different communities, I love bringing them together over meals, befriending each other, teaching them leadership, making them understand that they have a commonality, that ultimately by hurting the other, they're hurting themselves. In this context, here in the UK, where we are all cheek by jowl, and I have seen that some of those lessons through people have been taken over and taken to the Middle East and other places of conflict where there is conflict. And Gandhi, I think, would approve of that.
Interesting. He's, of course, I mean, I have to confess, I'm no example. I mean, I would.
You're a vegetarian, though. Well, and that's a very good thing.
I have a failed.
That's a great example.
I do my best on that.
He'd love you. Yeah.
My wife's perfect vegetarian. I'm stray sometimes, but I try.
Well, she's the example, then.
She's the example. But there's a thing. I mean, you talk about. I mean, we're all failed in various ways, and certainly I would, if we had the Second World, we were living at the time of the Second World War, Britain was a threat from Germany, then I would undoubtedly take up arms.
So would I. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So how do you conflict that? So if you're just honest about it, you have to allow for that.
You have to allow for that, but I would regard it as, even though knowing that I would do that, I would regard the higher path as one of the Gandhi espouses.
Yeah.
I mean,
but when what he also, I think, would agree is that if you did fight, you should do so without evil in your heart. But anyway, there's a great deal to be said about balance, and to be said about different people have different inclinations. And I would always say that Gandhi's example of non-violence, which is not just his, it came from Buddhism, it came from other Hindu traditions, it came from Christianity. He synthesized it, and his life was an example of that. I think it's great. Is a great influence. I've also been influenced by other people.
Yes, I love that. I mean, I love this chain of influence too. The idea that there is a kind of Gandhi. What astonished me once when I heard it was that the young Gandhi in South Africa corresponded with the old Tolstoy.
Yes.
And Tolstoy was an inspirational man.
That's
with
right.
A lot of very, very deep thinking man. And then you could look forward. You could say that, well, unquestionably, Martin Luther King was influenced by Gandhi.
That's right. He said it.
Yeah. I mean, it's this beautiful chain of
and you were influenced by him.
Everybody is
touched
by the wonderful world in that way. And I hope it'll move towards a more peaceful world ultimately. Sometimes I think it is moving that way. We had a very violent 20th century. It started off a pretty rough 21st century, but perhaps we're moving into a less violent world. I would hope so.
Well, I think the world is getting closer together, so that before it was possible, in one sense, to live your life in ignorance of the difficulties in other parts of the world if you were here in the West. You lived in an atomized society. You met your own people, you met your own friends, people from your own background. It was more, you were more able, and you'd sometimes look at international events, kind of like a viewer would in some kind of, bear baiting sport, so you'd kind of with binoculars or some, watch some with some macabre fascination of how these others live. And of course there's the whole thing about, our economy and well-being in large part was dependent on our businesses having relationships with these areas. Now we cannot afford to do that. So in every bedroom, even where you have a computer, or in every living room where you have a television, you see and indeed take part in the suffering of someone else. And in each of our societies, there are our neighbors, our friends. I even am connected to, part of my family is in another country. There's lots more of this. And of course, TV also shows how the other half live, how other people live. So there is aspiration in countries where, the living standard it may be very different from here, to have the living standard that is in other places. So I would encourage leaders, back to our original, here and in the Middle East and everywhere, to understand that people do not want to be in this sort of stratified hierarchy of particularly in terms of material possessions. They want a share in the cake. They want to live like we live, and that's a very interesting thing.
And so, what drives you? You're Hindu. You work for Initiatives of Change. Actually, curiously enough, the founder of which was a friend of Gandhi's,
Yes.
Bookman. We talked about Hinduism, and we're about to talk about interfaith relationships.
It's a Christian country. Yes, it is. This is a Christian country.
Be jealous that we're taking over.
You're not taking over. Why? Dressed like that. What's wrong with this? What's wrong with this? Oh, really?
How can people with different faiths coexist and love each other? Are there right and wrong faiths to believe in?
Fuck you! Fuck you, motherfucker!
Interfaith work should be a powerful instrument to counter extremism in order to build a better and more peaceful society. Unfortunately, what happens in Britain and countries like Britain is that much of the tension that is around involves the tension between the dominant Christian community and the Muslim minority. They are both people of the book and have many values in common. Arguably, the only differences that matter in social terms are cultural and based on a fear of the other. Our religious leaders are the people who can and should lead us to better understanding of the other and a more compassionate approach to one another. But so often their focus is on the problems of their own community and not on building a safer and more loving world.
With our freedom, with Islam and the Sharia.
Do our religious leaders show the standards of leadership we expect from them in order to move this broken world in which we live into an era of greater harmony? So, interfaith and your values and the
Yes.
whole, well, this is the whole summation of everything, but interfaith in Britain, where are we going to begin?
Well, I think interfaith is a great expression of my values, and it's something practical one can do. That's why I, brought it into your discussion of values, because values are the things that you value, and they animate you, and they impel you to do certain things. And my values have got me to work in this space of interfaith. And why? So the first thing I said about values was change. But the other thing I think is very, very interesting about interfaith, good interfaith, because there are horrendous models of interfaith. Good interfaith, actually, to me, is about actually learning to disagree, so disagreeing well. So it's not that you and I believe in the same thing, but it's actually you believe in your thing, I believe in another. Absolutely. Yet we exist in this space. And perhaps, just perhaps, we learn to love one another in full view of who we are, not the edited version of you that I have in my mind, and then I get really disappointed when you break my way of thinking. So it's a tremendously difficult thing to do, actually, if that is your standard. A very mundane example is just say, I know you're vegetarian, but just say my faith impels me to, and this is, this unfortunately has led to terrible consequences, that one person is a vegetarian through their faith, another person is not. That's resulted in conflict in some parts of the world, and can you imagine that one person who thinks that their faith is telling them about non-violence to animals will then be violent towards his fellow human being on that basis. But the faith their interpretation of that faith has impelled them to do that. My search is, how do you get the person who fundamentally believes in something very different to someone else? How can they coexist? And not just coexist, how can there be love between them? And that's something that there isn't any set answers to. I don't think. I mean, I've got some ideas and I'm experimenting with them, but I see you doing that in the work that you do in this beautiful home that you've invited me to, and other friends as well when they're at their best.
It's interesting because we've talked about Tolstoy. Tolstoy once said that the cruelest thing, in terms of belief and faith, the cruelest thing one person can say to another is that my belief is right and yours is wrong. I mean, and that is essentially what we must not do in interfaith. But on the other hand, there is a tendency to, when people get into interfaith discussions, certainly in Britain, and they're talking about their values, they'll always talk about, well, what is our common ground? And they spend so much time talking about their common ground that they forget to talk about their problems, their differences. And I think sometimes if they started by talking about their differences, their problems, and they would get the tough bit out of the way, and then they could go on. I mean,
so much of it, I think, is about going deeper. So, and allowing you to go deeper into your faith and me deeper into my faith, but my watching you as you go deeper into your faith. So, for instance, I have seen Muslim brothers and sisters really read from the Quran just in such reverie and with such respect that I cannot fail to be impressed by it, because I think this person isn't deluded. This person is doing what's right for him or her. Perhaps there need to be mechanisms where that person could then see me do something similar, and then see if they can negotiate. It's actually very interesting that we're sitting here in your home. It's very much like inviting somebody into your own home. If you are from one culture and one faith, and you go into someone else's home who's of another culture, you wouldn't dream of rearranging the furniture and telling them how they should drink their tea or how they should eat their food. You would be very, very respectful. I know you would. Most people would. You believe that your belief is that the way they're doing things is different or may not be right, because you think the table should be over there or something like that. You believe something different. I think it's a similar thing with faith, that you're allowed to believe that this other faith is wrong. That's why you're a Hindu and you're a Christian and you're something else. You're allowed to do that, and I think we've been so sensitive about expressing why we should, we're so sensitive in believing that we do believe different things, that it's led to this sort of passive aggression that I referred to at the beginning, all these kind of questions. And I think at its best, initiatives of change, the work that you do, allows for this freedom, this fresh expressions of the deepest things and unedited versions. And when there are issues of real conflict, we can moderate them. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that if you are an extremist, if I was with Adolf Hitler or someone like that, I would ever find, commonality. So with everything, this is why I like democracy, because what I'm saying is reinforced by the democratic model. But nonetheless, for the vast majority of us, going deeper into our own faith, deeper into our relationship with others, and the deeper into the possibility of what we can do together in a wisdom-seeking collegiality. That's what interfaith is.
Excellent. And they are, I guess. I mean, we get the leaders, or we get the leaders we get. We need our religions are they well led? I think sometimes that our faith leaders, I'm talking faith leaders from all denominations, there is perhaps not enough reaching out, not enough interfaith, not enough standing up and being counted. There is a tendency sometimes just to talk to their own and to be very comfortable.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yes, and I think they're changing. So one well-known leader here who's got a public profile, when he came into office, his first speech was only to his own community. Now, other people were looking at that, and but that person has learned along the way because of the training and resources provided by Faith in Leadership to leaders of the other faith communities, who then influenced him to be different. Only different, not in his faith, not in his practice, not in his creed, but really just in acknowledging that he is living with people who are different from him. That's it.
Well, I mean, the vulnerable in society, they are the very old, the very young, and they are the minorities. They're those, because they need to be careful. We should all have a sense of caring, shouldn't we, for each other. Exciting. Well, bless you. Thank you very much, Krish, for this discussion. It's really been a privilege to have you here on A&N. I'm very glad you could join us. So what have we learnt? Well, leadership is key, isn't it, to everything. And there are good leaders, there are bad leaders, there are inspiring leaders. Sometimes leaders are not, are not acknowledged. You look at de Klerk in South Africa. Certainly Nelson Mandela was the man everyone remembers, and with great justification. What a wonderful man, and how he suffered for his beliefs, his years in prison in Robben Island. But it took de Klerk, we needed de Klerk to enable Mandela to lead Africa to freedom, lead South Africa to freedom. Sometimes there are unacknowledged leaders who do great things. And everyone's a leader. Every family has its leader. Everybody is a leader in some way. And certainly we need standards. But what do you think? What do you think of your leader? Do you believe that the leaders in the Middle East are the leaders we deserve? What do you think of the leaders in the West? There's certainly a lot a lot of questionable actions taken by many leaders, despite the fact that they're democratically elected in the West. So what do you think of the great leaders of the world today? What's your vision of these men and women? We're likely to have Hillary Clinton as the next leader of the United States. It's a pretty fair bet that she may be the next US president. What do you think of her as a potential leader? Interesting times we have. The other question, I mean, we talked about Hinduism, we talked about Gandhi. I certainly like Gandhi's doctrine of ahimsa, of non-violence, the idea that you could make a change, a different kind of change, by standing up for non-violence. But what do you think? Is that the way you think? Do you agree with that approach? And then the whole question of interfaith relationships. I mean, we touched on that. We talked about personal values. Are our faith leaders really doing what they should be doing? We see a Middle East in which ISIS is a force that has to be reckoned with. But we don't perhaps see faith leaders speaking up as they might about this key issue and other key issues in the world today. What do you think of your faith leaders, of our faith leaders in the West? Do email us, do be in touch, do let us know what you think, because we'd be grateful to hear from you. We will take a real account of what you have to say to us. So we look forward to hearing from you at this email. There's an email address on the screen. Be in touch. Let us know what you think. We'd be glad to hear from you here on ANN Television. Thank you for being our guests.